Welcome to the online training of Extra Horizons Software Lifecycle Tool. My name is Salina and I will guide you through what we're going to discuss today. We'll start with the core concepts of the Software Lifecycle Tool, after which we'll dive right into the tool to show you how you can create your first software system, a release and a change. Once we've added all the core components to our change, we're going to look at how you can verify it and make sure that it can be added to a new release of your software system. And then finally, we'll show you how the Software Lifecycle Tool generates 62304 compliant documentation, which can then be added to your QMS. This section will explain three core concepts which the Software Lifecycle Tool is built upon. First off, your software system. Depending on the architectural design of your medical device, you'll likely have one or multiple software systems. If you want to release a new version of a software system, you create a new release. Each release consists of a set of changes. Changes are bodies of work. It's important to note that in order for a release of a software system to go live, each change needs to be verified. Verified means that all the checks or all the requirements of the 62304 standard are completed. I will show you how to create your first software system, release, and change in the Software Lifecycle Tool. In this overview, you see a list of software systems that I have already created for my medical device. When I create a new software system, I need to indicate a name. So let's take, for example, a web application. As required per the 62304 standard, you need to add or indicate a safety class for each software system, depending on the risk of harm. And you can add a description if you want. So in this case, the web application is a portal for doctors and nurses to consult their patients' data. Once you've created your software system, you are required to create the first release of the software system. So let's take a release v0.0, which has the status ongoing because we still need to do the work for it. You can add a description. So for example, in this release, we want to create the first version of our portal. And then you can add team members depending on their role. So a project manager, risk analyst, and so on. Once your release is created, you want to define a change. So a change is a body of work that your development team will work on. So in this case, let's say for the release v.0.0, we want to add multi-factor authentication. That is going to be the body of work that my development team will work on. The link to the change request refers to the change request in terms of the ISO 13485. So meaning that the approval of the change request on your QMS level, you can link to any document you want here. So for now, I'll just add a dummy link here. But you can refer to any documentation that you want. Once I've added all the information required, I can click on Add, and my first software system on the web application has been created. Once you've created your first software system, in our case a demo web application, you will see some more information on the releases and the changes tab for that software system. Let's start with the releases. In this overview, you see that we have one release, v0.0, which is currently live, and a second release, v0.1, that is currently ongoing, meaning that your development team is still working on it. From this tab, you can also add a new release. So for example, we make a new release v0.2. For each new release that you create, you need to indicate what the release is based on. This is your source release. So for example, let's say that you start from v0.0. the existing requirement list that was verified for that given release will be taken as your starting point. Description, you can add anything you want, and again, you can add some team members depending on the role. As always, each new release consists of a body of work that your development team is going to work on. So, for example, for this release, we want to add a single sign-on flow, and that change has been approved in the upper lying change request according to the 13485, for which we can add a link here. You now see that the new release has been added to the list with the status ongoing, so meaning that this release can be worked on. In the Changes tab for our software system, we get a bit of a different overview. So this overview shows the changes that are currently listed for the given software system. So as mentioned in our previous example, we created a new release, v0.2, which we wanted to add a single sign-on flow. The status is still ongoing because the necessary steps have not yet been taken, and a link to the change request can be consulted here. In this section, we'll show you how to ensure that your change is verified and that you have the necessary 62304 compliant documentation for a new release of your software system. When we click on the release that we want to continue working on, we enter the work mode. So this is basically the core area of the Software Lifecycle Tool. This is where you're going to ensure that you provide all the necessary information and perform the necessary checks to be 62304 compliant. On the left-hand side here, you see some of the core aspects that you need to fulfill for each change. You need to add your software requirements and verify them through test cases. For your design specification, you need to provide a soup list to ensure that you show which software of unknown provenance you are using. And then in the unit and integration testing, you have a product anomaly list where you enter all the anomalies after testing that you can justify. You have a section where you specify your test environments for your test runs, and then a handy overview of the test cases designed for your test engineer. Let's start with the software requirements overview. So in this section here, you see that we are in the edit mode. So this is a release and an underlying change that not yet has been verified and therefore can be worked in. You can see that we are in release v0.2 and that the link that you provided to your ISO 13485 change request is linked here. Underneath the change details, you see that we are working on a specific body of work, which is adding a single sign-on flow. Let's start with our software requirements, as they are the starting point for each team that will be working on a new release of your software system. In this overview, you see a list of requirements that we have already defined. Here, you can add requirements, update them, or delete them. We can add a new requirement by going here, and for example, the requirement is on the single sign-on flow, and here you can choose the type, which is functional requirement, and then you can specify the requirement even more, detailing the user is able to use Google as an identity provider to sign into the web application. Once the requirement is saved, it will show in our list overview here at the bottom. Let's say, for example, that we want to update a requirement that we have already created. We can click on it, go to the requirement details, and make changes as we want here. Once we've created a new requirement, you can see that it needs to be verified through a test case. You can easily add a test case for a given requirement via the button here. So we'll add the details on our test case here. We will indicate the method, manual or automatic, and the type. We then define the test steps that the test engineer should take in order to verify that the requirement has been fulfilled. So, for example, step 1, step 2, and we add the expected result that is needed as a response from the test case. So we save the test case, and we will see here that if we click on the requirement now, that the test case has been added. If we click on it, we can make changes to it. And if we want to add another test case for the given requirement, we can do so by going here. So this is test 2. We indicate the method and the type, a test step, and a result. When we go back to the test cases overview now, we see that for requirement on single sign-on, we have 2 test cases defined. So now that we have identified a test case for each requirement in order to verify it, we obviously need to run the test cases. So in order to run a test case and to define an outcome, we first need to define which environment it's going to run in. So underneath the unit and integration testing, you can create your test environments. So for our example, we've already created an environment on an iPhone X and an environment on a Samsung A20. And here you can add any new test environments that you want. Moving back to our soft requirements now, we see that for the requirement that we've added, there are 2 test cases created. This test case, if we look at the test run, we see that it has not run yet. So if we want to run it and change the outcome, we need to identify a test environment on which we want to run it. So in this case, let's say it's the iPhone X. And then we can indicate whether it has passed, failed, or it can be skipped if it doesn't need to be retested. So let's, for example, put it to pass now. We save our changes. If you go back to the test overview now, we see that the first test has now been color-coded green, meaning that it has passed. We can do the same thing for the second test that verifies our requirement. So we move to set test run. We, for example, say that this test case has failed on a Samsung AW20, and we save our changes. So again, moving back to the test overview for the given requirement, we see that 1 test has passed and 1 test has failed. If we look at the entire overview of our requirements, we see that the column test cases here provides you with an easy overview of what still needs to be done. So just taking out a couple of examples. So the first requirement has 1 test case linked to it, which can be skipped. The second requirement has 2 test cases linked to it in order to verify it. 1 has currently been passed and 1 has not yet run yet. The third one has 1 test case allocated to it, but this test case has failed. So this provides your team with an easy overview of what still needs to be done in order to verify a change. We'll show you the dedicated section on test cases. In the Software Lifecycle Tool, underneath the Unit and Integration Testing header, you will see a section on test cases. Here you will find an overview of all test cases linked to your requirements for this given release. Here you'll see the ID of the test case, some basic information, and then the requirement it is linked to. This mode allows you to make bulk changes to test cases. So for example, I can select all, or I can multi-select a couple of test cases, click on Edit, and here I can change the outcome, the method, and the type. So given that all these test cases have an orange color coding, they have not run yet. So let's say that I want to mark some of the test cases as passed. I also need to indicate what environment they were run on. So let's take the iPhone X. Next to that, I could also change the method and the type of test. When I save it, you'll see that the tests that I multi-selected have now been updated on an outcome that is passed. One of the key benefits of the Software Lifecycle Tool is that it will help your team in making sure that the necessary steps and requirements are fulfilled to be 62304 compliant. So in order for a release to go live, the change needs to be verified. Verifying a change indicates that you've completed all the necessary steps for the 62304 standard. So in this case, we've written our requirements, added test cases. Some have failed, some have not run, some are skipped. Let's see what happens if we try to verify the change. So you'll see here that we get a notification that some of the tests have not run yet or have failed, indicating that this change should not be added to release, given that some requirements are not covered by a test case, or some of the requirements are not covered by a test case that is actually passed. So let's, for example, now make sure that the test case that was not run, we put it to passed on an environment. And we also make sure that any test cases that have failed, we rerun them and they end up being passed. So making sure this one is passed as well. So now our requirements are covered by a test case, which is either skipped, which can be justified, or have passed. So now when we click on Verify Change, we see that the change has been verified. So meaning that all the checks to be 62304 compliant are completed. Now we can actually launch the release. Let's see what happens when, before launching the release, we make any changes to the requirements. So let's say, for example, that I add a new requirement. You'll see here that a new requirement was added, but it was not yet covered by a test case. At the top here, you'll see that the change loses its verification status, which means that you have to re-verify the change. So this indicates to the team working on the requirements and on development that they need to ensure that each requirement is covered by a test case. Again, clicking on Verify Change here will show us a notification that we cannot approve the change because not every requirement was covered or verified by a test case. So here again, you would have to add a test case and run it and make sure that it runs, or we can skip it. So now again, when we click on Verify Change, we'll see that the change can be verified and we can actually proceed to launching the release. But in order to export the necessary information or documentation for your release to be 62304 compliant, you're also required to maintain a soup list for each release and a product anomaly list. Your soup list contains a list of software of unknown provenance that you are using in your release. So this can be different libraries that you're using for different purposes. So for each package, you identify the language, the manufacturer, and the purpose in order to use it. You can add multiple soup items here. The same accounts for your product anomaly list. Your product anomaly list contains an overview of bugs or anomalies that you have encountered during testing, but for which you are motivating that they are okay to stay into your release. This list can later be used for a new release in order to address those anomalies. So again, here you can add any product anomaly item that you want. So once that's done, you have your requirements, you have your soup list and your product anomaly list. You can verify the change from any given point in the tool. The change will check if all the necessary information has been provided and will allow you to verify the change and then launch the release. So we have release v.0.1 here. If we launch the release, we can confirm it, and we'll see that we enter our view-only mode, which was previously editable. So meaning that for this release, no changes can be made to any of the components, being it the requirements, the soup list, or the product anomaly list. So when we move back to our software system, we'll see now that the v0.1 was set to live. So now that we've verified our change and included it in a new release of our software system, which has been put live to our end users, this section will show you how to export or generate and export the necessary 62304 documentation that you need to include in your QMS. So let's say for the demo web application, we want to generate and export the 62304 records for our latest release, which is the v0.2. We go and click here, and we get an overview of all the records that we can export for our given version. So we have our software requirements specification, which is basically an overview of all the requirements that we have defined. Our list with software of unknown provenance, a list with product anomalies for this version, a verification plan, which has an overview of your software requirements and the coverage by the test cases, and then a verification report, which also includes the outcome of the test run. So by default, all of these documents are selected. When I click on Export Selection, we will see that a zip file will be downloaded locally with all the documents in there. So you'll see here, I have my software of unknown provenance, my product anomaly, my software requirement specification, verification plan, and verification report, all downloaded locally in PDF form. So when I open, for example, the software requirement specification, this is what I get. So for my software system, this version, I get an overview of all the software requirements that I have identified. Same accounts for example, the product anomaly list. Here is where I identified a set of anomalies. Again, a PDF form which can be easily included in my QMS.